Good evening and welcome. It is just a couple of ticks past 5 p.m. in Topanga Canyon on a Monday night. If you're watching this, you are either part of the Recovery 2.0 membership, or you are watching this on replay, or someone from our membership invited you to join in for this very special presentation that we have tonight. I have the distinct honor and pleasure to connect with and to interview my friend, Seane Corn. Now, many of you guys know who Seane is. She is a world-renowned yoga teacher and activist. She's one of the most powerful speakers, and now I can honestly say she's one of the most powerful writers that I've gotten a chance to read. I've only read part of her galley. Her book is not yet released. It is called Revolution of the Soul, and it is a deeply powerful and moving story, an incredibly well-written story that is so relevant for our community, people in recovery from anything, and that's the entire human race, by the way. So the directive, and I'm going to say this a lot tonight, the directive to our community from me to you, and I receive nothing by saying this, is buy this book on pre-order, right, Seane? Pre-order right now?
Pre-order right now. You can go to revolutionofthesoulbook.com.
That's it.
And they can download the first chapter for free.
Okay. Download the first chapter of this book for free. Make that commitment. And if you are not as deeply moved as I was in reading it, you do not have to buy the book. But I'm guessing that you're going to be deeply moved by it. And one of the things I love about it so much is how real it is. We're going to get a chance to talk about it tonight. So revolutionofthesoulbook.com. Stacy has put it right here in the chat bar. So make a point of bookmarking that. Let's give Seane our full attention tonight, and then you can go and you can check out the video that she's got there and download the first free chapter, and you'll understand, I think, very quickly why this is such an important and relevant book. And before you get to that, let me just simply say, Seane, welcome, and thank you so much for your passion, your leadership, your activism, your presence, your great spirit, and thank you for your kindness and time in addressing the Recovery 2.0 community. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tommy. And being a part of the Recovery 2.0 community is a privilege. It's an honor. The work that you're doing and the outreach that you've had to this community is far and wide, as I'm seeing just on this thread. And it's such an important conversation. And as we know, just fellowship is everything. Community is everything. And when we can break shame around any addiction, whether it's sex addiction, food addiction, gambling, drugs, alcohol, it just opens up a conversation that normalizes the human experience. And I think that that's what is so vital to these online programming, so that people have a chance to hear aspects of themselves spoken out loud so they don't feel so alone. So thank you. I'm proud to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Seane, I want to start out by reading a paragraph right out of your book, if you don't mind, and hear your comments about it. I wrote Revolution of the Soul in part to inspire and provide the tools for anyone who desires to participate in creating a better world. My hope is that these pages will encourage you to look beyond your limited perceptions and the stories the ego so carefully curates, so you can get to the truth of your soul. This book is intensely personal and hopefully universally applicable. Each chapter has a story from my own healing journey and spiritual path, accompanied by a vast array of teachings, practical and spiritual, that I've been exposed to over the years. Seane, I'd like to ask you, when somebody reads a book like this, well, when they read your book, they're going to be very clear right up front what your journey has been about. And by page 2, I'm like, oh my God, this woman has been through so much. And it brings to mind a thought. They used to say every saint has a past, right? And I say every yoga teacher has a past. And so certainly you're falling into that category. Please tell me about this book from your perspective, and that story that begin with your personal journey of from suffering into less suffering, if you will.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, like, it's interesting to hear you read an aspect of my book out loud. I'm still trying to get accustomed to hearing my own words reflected back to me. As you know, because we've talked about it privately, writing this book was really hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. 3.5 years it took me. And there were so many times I wanted to stop unpacking the story and just give it, just even 60% would have been enough. And yet the whole thing about this book is about breaking shame. It's about inviting people to reframe their narratives, to take accountability for their own humanity. And the book wouldn't let me write that without actually exposing that myself and modeling what that looked like. But that was a bitch, because it really forced me to have to go deeper into my own emotional process. And what I realized is, how closely guarded my narrative is. Like, and I'm sure a lot of people who are in the recovery community know this. It's like, I can tell my story really well. And when you get to a certain place within the story, I'm like Fort Knox. Like, it just, the gates close. Like, I curate the story. And especially being a leader in the community and being someone who's so visible and talks nonstop about the journey. This book called me in a way that I hadn't been called in a long time, and it forced transparency. It was uncomfortable and awkward and vulnerable, and so many times I just approached it with so much resistance, and yet I would sit down, and my mantra became, I had to write everything, but I didn't have to print everything. Like, I had to find a way that I still protected my own soul, but I had to write it and at least name it on the page and break the secret that I've had even within myself. And what happened was that once I actually owned it, isn't there a saying, you're only as sick as your secrets? These secrets had been put out personally, publicly to a degree, but once I got accustomed to it in my body, I didn't print everything, because there were certain things that I did have to take care of myself. But I definitely went 100% in and modeled what it looked like to be unapologetically transparent about the human experience, because it's the only way in which we heal. I say it in the book, we can't change that which we won't see. This book forced me to have to really look deeply at myself and confront my teacher's hypocrisies. Like, I'll tell you what you need to do to heal, but don't look too close behind the curtain. So the last 3.5 years were really transformative that way. And I had to work with a therapist the entire time because I was dealing with so much trauma. I had to really look at, my addictions are, I'm not at risk of doing things like drugs or alcohol at this point in my life, or acting out sexually. But there were other things that came up for me, go-tos that just crept up from my past that were really interesting to have to go back towards, just codependency, food, shopping, watching TV, just shit to self-soothe. And it's like, okay, wherever you go, there you are. And so that was my process in writing the book. In terms of what it's about, the book, there's 12 personal narratives that show, it's not a memoir, because if I was going to write a memoir, it would be much more nuanced than this. But it's 12 personal anecdotes, stories that show events in my life from the time I was 18, really up until a few years ago, that illustrated some very deep teachings that I couldn't have known at the time, that I was being introduced to my shadow self and the tools eventually that would be available. And I share the narrative and then break it down. In the second part of each narrative is the teachings that are actually happening in that narrative. So in the narrative, I'm 18 years old, but in the teachings, I'm 52, and saying, here's what was actually happening. Here's what I couldn't have known. These are the tools, and invite the reader to actually unpack their own narratives, look at the stories they tell themselves are true, and see what the tools are, whether it's yoga or trauma and mind-body experience, mysticism, and then going deeper into the personal evolution to really a global revolution of what it means to take accountability and change the world, but from the inside out.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking as you speak that we're so quick as a community, as a recovery community, we're so quick often to separate ourselves from everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is incorrect in terms of perception.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is, I feel like trauma, which could be considered one of the roots of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a human characteristic. I almost don't feel like you escape that. There may be a few examples, but very, very few examples of people who live a full spectrum life, at least in this day and age, who don't have some kind of addictive behavior, or not at least on the spectrum, if not at least in the way that they are addicted to their own belief system or their beliefs or their thoughts, and behaviors that they engage in knowingly or unknowingly to try to self-soothe, as you put it.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thought about the global or universal or ubiquitous nature of addiction?
What's my thought about it?
Yeah.
I don't personally know anyone who's not addicted to something. I don't know how it would be possible, because we have an ego. We are always looking to fill that void, whether it's with food or sex or drugs or alcohol. Mm-hmm. And until we learn how to be in relationship with all aspects of ourselves, meaning the light as well as the shadow, we will always look for ways to avoid the discomfort of really our own humanity. When you talk to trauma, often when we think of trauma, we think shock trauma, those big unimaginable events. And so people think, well, I don't have trauma. I didn't witness a murder. I didn't experience rape. I wasn't in a war. So there's capital T trauma. But I think the trauma that we all experience is developmental trauma, which we tend to minimize because it doesn't seem like a big deal. And the truth is, though, what might be traumatic for me is not going to be traumatic for you, and vice versa. But when we experience trauma, and trauma is defined as anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling helpless, hopeless, out of control, or unable to respond. So let's say as a child, you got bullied, teased, your parents were getting a divorce, you found out a parent was having an affair. In that moment of overwhelm, especially when you're so young that you don't have words to express what it is that you feel or that you see, chemicals released from the body, from the brain, they flood into the body and put us in fight, flight, freeze, or collapse. In the moment of that reaction, the body contracts, and the imprint of that story now lives within the cells. It becomes who we are. If as kids we've been taught to discharge or rinse the energy being the shadow, fear, rage, grief, guilt, that's associated with it, whatever that particular trauma is. If we haven't learned how to release it from the system, that energy stays suppressed in the body as tension. And tension, stress, and anxiety are the number one causes of illness and depression. Now, as a kid, often our parents or whoever is our guardians, big feelings come up. Your parents, they're good people. They're not bad people. But their impulse might be to do this. Oh my God, you're sad? Here, have a cookie. Oh my God, you're scared? Let's go shopping. And so their impulse, instead of just letting the child be with the fear, the rage, the guilt, the grief, they want to soothe it. Or they do this. You're mad? I'll give you something to be angry about, and shame you. And that tension is cumulative. So every single time that child has an experience that in the unconscious reminds them of that first assault, that body contracts and it contracts and it contracts. And they continue to look for ways to self-soothe. And as we get older, it often becomes drugs, alcohol, sex, and a bunch of other different things as a way to change the discomfort rather than be with it. So to answer your question, unless you were raised in the most incredible environment where you are being taught to process your big feelings and get comfortable with your rage and your shame and own it, fully embody it, learn how to reframe the narrative, it would be very hard for me to imagine that we don't have these narratives that live in our body that we try to change by using substances or behaviors in order to disconnect ourselves from our own sensitivity. And so I think that I don't think I've ever met anyone who is not addicted to something unless you're enlightened. And I haven't yet met anyone who's enlightened. And so I tend to think that addiction is universal, that it often stems from trauma and unprocessed emotions. And of course, a biochemical response and a need to find balance in their nervous system because something outside of their nervous system was out of control.
Thank you so much. The revolution of the soul that you write about in this book, obviously for you and your path, includes yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga, in this day and age, yoga means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Could you speak about your perspective on yoga, your expanded view of yoga, and how that is a part of the revolution of the soul, and how it's worked, how it's been a part for you, and how perhaps you might suggest that could be a part for anyone if they wanted to engage in it?
Both physiologically and philosophically, the practice of yoga is a deep part of my own work, but it's not the end all. I mean, as a philosophy, we understand that we are all one, that everything is connected, everything is interdependent, and that our work is to move into wholeness and to be in relationship, whether it's with this planet, another person, or with our higher power or God. But we can't be in relationship with the world around us until we're in relationship with ourselves. And that means all aspects of the self, not just the parts we like, but the shadow parts that everyone has, including the addict within us, to give voice and space. It's our shadow that allows us to really embody the light. So it's my fear that teaches me love. It's my resentment that teaches me forgiveness. It's my judgment that teaches me compassion, not as an intellectual thought, but as an embodied realization, which is more sustainable. So yoga as a philosophy teaches us about this interdependency and about being in relationship. And there's a pathway that it gives us tools, the yamas and the niyamas, behaviors and belief systems that we can adhere to day to day that can help us just get into our bodies and be disciplined. And ultimately, this discipline moves us towards enlightenment, which is the samadhi, or empowerment, or love, as I like to look at it, just keeping it just real. Like that's what we can do in this lifetime is love. So the pathway of yoga teaches us how to confront our limiting beliefs, how to develop habits so that we can stay self-regulated, and how to manage the ego and the identity in which the ego often moves us towards, and not to validate ourself based on those identities, but to be in relationship with the bigger self. But again, you can't be in relationship with a bigger self until you're also in relationship to the ego. So the philosophy of yoga gives us that pathway. There's two things within the philosophy of yoga that I adhere to, which is one, yoga is now, which means, again, not just yoga is now when I'm all rainbows and unicorns and strawberries. Yoga is in the addiction. Yoga is in the domestic violence. Yoga is in the acting out sexually. There's not a single moment that is not yoga, that is not moving us into wholeness and integration. And so we have to be like, no matter what's happening, that moment is yoga. And ahimsa, nonviolence. But nonviolence is not the right word because it starts with a negative. It's like agape, it's love. It is, it's the presence of an energy that is greater than love. It's God, essentially. It's God. It's the higher power. It's creative consciousness. And so our work is to recognize the ways in which we participate in suffering. Because when we participate in suffering, whether it's ourselves, whether it's to another person, then we are engaging in creating the very separation that is a dis-ease to our culture. Remember, community is what unites us. Isolation, separation is what divides and also what perpetuates oppression, which destroys. And so the practice helps us to identify the ways in which we divide within ourselves, the ways in which we create separation in ourselves, because we can't heal it, so we see it, and it allows us to bring those divides into more unification. And so philosophically, I understand that this practice allows us to bear witness to the disconnection within ourselves so that we can open to love. And it's through ahimsa where we recognize that we can't be free unless we're all free, that my liberation is dependent upon your liberation and every single person who's listening and every soul within the world. And so if I'm committed to yoga and my own personal liberation, then I have to be willing to commit to global liberation. But I first have to identify the ways in which I actually create that separation, the ways I'm complicit to it, the ways in which I participate in it and benefit from it. That's the deeper work. Now, so as a philosophy, my action, my commitment to the world is dependent upon this idea of unification, of oneness. But being one doesn't mean we're the same. And until I respect and honor those differences that exist, then my oneness is actually a disservice to the world in which we are part of. It's easy for me to say we're all one because I benefit from this system. But if there's someone who lives on the margin, they're not going to get access to the same resources that I have. They may have a very different reality. So are we really, in their view, are we really all one? So I've got to really unpack that within myself, and yoga invites me into that inquiry. On a physiological level, remember, trauma, no separation between the mind and the body contracts. It's through asana that we release the tension. When we release the tension, very often the memories that are stored in that tension arise to the surface. But that contraction has kept us safe. That contraction was a survival mechanism that when we were young was invaluable because we didn't have the language. But at 20, 30, 50, it doesn't work anymore. But the problem is we don't know what's on the other side of that contraction. We have no evidence that it's safe. It is liberation, without a doubt, but our nervous system doesn't know that. So that contraction has served us. What yoga does is it, hopefully in a safe container, it brings us into that contraction and it forces us, before we can get to the other side of it, bear witness to our ego. Bear witness to the addictive part of our brain that's like, we got to get out of this. This is not safe. This is fucked up. This woman is fucked up. She's making me feel. It's in those moments we think about sex, we think about food, we do our to-do lists. Since on the mat, we don't often have access, maybe not to alcohol or to drugs or to food, our mind will show us the ways in which our addiction will trickle out in other ways. But the practice gives us tools to stay present, to breathe into the sensation, to notice what comes up, to not dissociate, or if we do dissociate, at least name it. And I think that the practice gives us very practical tools to really be able to be in the discomfort in our body safely.
Thank you, Seane. There's an evolutionary pulse to being a human being. What I mean by that is, well, actually in the universe is in love with evolution. It would seem, because if you just look outside your window or at any system in nature, you'll notice that things are always changing.
Yeah. We
are always changing. Addiction to me seems like an attempt to stop one's own personal evolution. That we're going against that directive of nature to continually flow through, where every step or every breath is a step actually into the unknown.
Yes.
So on this path of evolution, it seems that we will do anything in our power to stop it. That the almost like the it's not our nature to do so, but what we have learned is we have learned to try to stop this evolution. And as a result, I think we grab onto dogma. We grab onto ideas. We grab onto the next right thing. And we need that next right thing, by the way, to last a lifetime. Because if it doesn't last a lifetime, that means, oh my God, we have to find something else. And that little experiment didn't work.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And speaking about now is this stages of the evolution, or stages of the revolution, as you put it in your book, as we develop as human beings. Do you see it as a series of stages, one to the next? And what is this thing about relapse, where we found a new stage, but then somehow there's this vacillation, this fluctuation, where we found a new stage and it's better than the old stage, but even though we know it's better than the old stage, we still go back. So I just want to get your sense of the movement here, from one stage to the next of the human experience, or from addiction to recovery, or darkness to light, however you would put that.
Well, in the book, I break it up in two sections: the evolution of the soul, and part 2 is the revolution of the soul, because our evolution is the revolution. And it is a process that's very unique to each soul. Like, I can't define for someone, here's exactly how this is going to happen chronologically. Like, from 1 to 8, it's this. And then from 8 to 16, it's that. Everyone's, because of karma or historical, cultural, ancestral trauma, everyone's got their own very unique life story and pathway. I would be remiss to suggest that there's a distinct rhythm to the way in which one evolves. It's really between each person and the God of their own understanding. My hope, though, is that everyone who's listening recognizes that there are tools. There's a variety of tools, that the medicine is different for everyone, and that the pathway is fraught with challenges because we have trauma and our ego wants to latch on to what it knows, because, like I said before, it doesn't know what's on the other side of it. There's no evidence of freedom, and the mind is a clever little fuck, isn't it? It'll just like grab and cling on to everything. It'll try to convince you, and sometimes work, which is often what happens with relapse. I can only speak within my own journey. One of the ways in which my addictive behavior revealed itself was at a very young age, and we've talked about this before on another something else that we did, and I write about it in the book, because I think it's often not talked about enough, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and which is different than obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And when I experienced childhood trauma starting at 6, my nervous system didn't know how to manage the overwhelm in my body, and I just wanted to feel better. Now, of course, I wouldn't be conscious of any of this at this age. This is something that I would identify later in life, when I would be around 17 when I moved to New York City, and then got into therapy and learned that OCD was actually was a thing. I thought it was a quirky behavior. To manage my trauma and my overwhelm, I would do something that I called patterning. I was obsessed with 4s and 8s, would touch things, blink, swallow, repeat names, like I love you, had to happen in 4 times, because I was afraid that if it didn't, something bad would happen. Usually it was associated with the death of my mom or my dad or someone that I loved. Because I didn't have a relationship with God, I played God. So I thought, well, if I did these things, then I can prevent chaos in the world, because something chaotic had happened. I wasn't protected from that chaos. My sweet little psyche tried to grab onto something to feel better. And because I didn't have drugs or alcohol at that time, touching things made me feel better. And if I didn't do it, the anxiety would come up. And the anxiety is a sensation in the body that's so different for everyone. But it's the sensation of the anxiety that was intolerable. I felt better in my body by touching things, or, like I said, those compulsive behaviors helped my body relax. But it never got to the root. So it was when I became a teenager when I actually found drugs and alcohol and realized, like, oh, there's something else that can make me feel better.
Yes.
And then eventually moving to New York and watching those compulsive and addictive patterns escalate, and the shame that would show up around it was constant, because I was always having to trip. To make my body balanced, Like if someone knocked into me on one shoulder, I would have to find ways to knock into them with the other shoulder without it being awkward, but it was always awkward. And so I was always dealing with the shame of having to do these behaviors that I knew were weird and quirky and just being in denial about it. It wasn't until I got into therapy where I realized that it was my body's response to trauma, that this was my drug of choice until I actually found a drug of choice. And through therapy, through asana, because in asana, what had happened once is a teacher kicked my foot. I started obsessing. The anxiety was raising in my body. I'm fixating on how I can trip over him later to replicate the action on the other side. And the teacher said, breathe and everything changes. And I heard it loud and clear inside. So I took a breath, nothing changed. The anxiety actually got worse. Took another breath, nothing changed. I could feel my heartbeat start to get faster. My skin was getting red. My fingers were twitching. And I don't know if it was the 5th breath or the 500th breath, but there was a shift. There was one breath where the anxiety in my body changed. And I felt my nervous system de-escalate. And I was able to leave the school for one of the first times without feelings of doom, without feeling like I jinxed myself. Like if I don't replicate this pattern, I'm going to kill my father. And I realized there was something to my anxiety, my compulsive behaviors, and deep breathing. And after that, I'm not going to suggest that, boom, my OCD was healed. I had to do a lot of really deep inner work to go back to the original trauma, to understand how my body had created this particular mechanism. And so in regards to relapse, anytime I would find myself in an environment where the stressors were higher, it would be harder for me to be able to convince myself to breathe and everything changes, to trust that no one was going to die, that these tools actually worked. But I would just be with it. Like sometimes I would enact on it. You know, that would be my version of relapse. It'd be like, I just need to leave the fucking house without like checking the doorknob 4 times. Like, let's just.
Yes.
And,
yes.
But more often than not, if I had the opportunity just to sit with the discomfort, feel the fear, that eventually it passed and became something else. And so the real work was getting to the core, really going to the core of the trauma and dealing with the bigger feelings. But the asana practice, the breath work, and therapy were all tools that I could use that could help the moments between anxiety and relapse get shorter and shorter and shorter. Where at one time it might have been 3 months. Now I still have moments of it when I'm highly stressed. Now it might just be a deep breath. And just like you're cool, ground your feet, resource. I was very fortunate in that for me, once I got into yoga and therapy, I was able to stop drinking, to stop doing drugs, to stop acting out sexually, to stop stealing. It was very natural for me. It was a progression. I didn't have it in biochemically, even though I gave it my best shot. Addiction in that realm, I was able to I wouldn't name myself an addict in that capacity. I live a sober life because I choose to, not because out of necessity. It's necessity only because I just don't want to live my life in any way where I'm not feeling my feelings. And so I've chosen since I've been around 21 years old to be sober. But like I said, my drug of choice would be obsessive compulsive behavior and fatalistic thinking. And that's really where my addiction will go to this day. So I won't pick up the alcohol, but I might find myself patterning. And so that's my version of relapse. And I have to forgive myself, not judge it, not shame it, look at where it's coming from and try to get to the root of it, because the shadow, it's not about the obsessive compulsive behaviors. It's about the fear. It's about the abuse. It's about whatever it is. I've got to sit with that and be comfortable in that pain so that I don't act out in other ways.
Of course, that's a practice.
I'm 52 fucking years old.
Right. Well, me too.
Yes, it's a problem. But I
Yes.
have to say, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for all of it. I was a sensitive child. I felt the world differently than perhaps other people did. And I wasn't given the tools at a young age to validate my feelings and my intuition. The world seemed crazy to me, but what was reflected back to me was that I was crazy. And I see that in a lot of addicts, that they're creative, that they're intuitive, that they're emotional, that they feel, they're empathic. And I wish the world was better designed to support the differences that exist within people who are addicts, rather than saying, well, here they are classified in this category, and we're going to lump all addicts in that one category and not look at it more spiritually. And if only the world was better set up to help people like us who do move towards addiction just feel and be okay in the big feelings and learn how to manage them, then maybe we would make choices recognizing early on that these choices aren't going to work for our particular personality and the way in which we show up in the world.
Yes. I see it through my whole history. As I look back, I ended up in so many schools I should never have been in. Someone like me just would not probably flourish there, and ironically, and I don't mean this as a joke, just me actually stumbling upon the Grateful Dead actually provided me with a forum of a context of understanding for people who thought about things very, very differently. And that it wasn't just purely about drugs and alcohol or anything like that, that there was the elements of community and the elements of understanding and compassion and kindness and thinking different that really made a difference for someone like me. And ironically, in recovery, first in 12-step recovery for me, and then in the world of yoga and meditation and all yoga, Kundalini world and power world and Hatha world and India world, and this global movement towards wholeness, I have sought and I have found what I very kindly, and I mean this in the best way possible, I've just found all the freaks that I ever wanted to hang out with, the best of the best. And you should know that if I ever call you a freak, that's an unbelievable compliment coming from me. Unbelievable compliment. But just a moment ago, you were talking, it skipped my mind, but this path of recovery seems fraught at every step of the way with newfound challenges. And I was just wondering if you could continue to speak about this idea that we're in the middle of something that doesn't really have an end per se. Like, this actually is the work.
Yeah.
We're not graduating because we got sober. Great. We got 10 years sober. Great. Well, we're 15 years now sober, 20, or whatever the thing is, isn't the joy or part of the end of stress being this understanding that this isn't something that is the weekend where we finally can exhale and do nothing and sit back on a beach and everything actually is just, fine without any effort on our part. Like, that's not actually coming.
No. There's that saying that what gets in the way is the way. And like I said before, like, my experience is the rate in which we stay in our stuckness just gets shorter and shorter. But it's not as if, unless you're enlightened, I think empowerment is ownership. Empowerment is accountability. Empowerment is the empathy that arises from self-responsibility and really being in connection with our own humanity. It's what cultivates the empathy for me to love you and to love, like you say, all the freaks that are out there who are just doing their best to open up to the God that's within themselves. Mm-hmm. In the arc of the book, the reason I wrote it the way I did, moving from the evolution to the revolution, the evolution is the inner work we do that never ends. You just get better and better tools. The revolution is the now what. But even in the now what, it's not about, well, now we're going to go out and serve the world. What I wanted to show people in my arc, like, for example, my first foray into service was with the intention to help. Like, I had all these skills, so I wanted to help. Now, There's nothing wrong with that. Unless you start to understand white supremacy and the dominant culture, and then suddenly your help is fraught with hierarchy. I was like, it was like one more thing. Like here, I thought I got it. And I was just being shown like, oh, honey, tip of the iceberg, where trauma lives within our psyche, within our body. So I had to start looking within and seeing that my help is actually saviorism. And so it's like, okay, there we are. And so the whole rest of the book, I have to own, even up to just a few years ago, of the way in which racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, ableism, bias, prejudice, stereotyping, all lives within my body. And it can't not, because of my upbringing, because of my socialization, because of my socioeconomic status, because of where my grandparents are from and what their beliefs are. If I embody my trauma, I also embody my grandparents. And I embody this nation's, and I embody my gender. Now, on a rational level, I might walk through the world and be open-minded and non-judgmental. But put me in a situation where I'm afraid, where the rational part of my brain shuts down and the reactive, the primal part of my brain suddenly wakes up. Again, there ain't nothing rational about me. I am my grandmother. I am my racist grandfather in that moment. But unfortunately, we're not aware of that. So we end up saying or doing things that continue to perpetuate this separation, that continue to cause more harm. So the book, I model all of the ways in which, even though I've got all these great tools and all these amazing teachers, that the lessons get more complex, more nuanced, more universal. And I think the one thing that I would hope that anyone is listening, if there is one tool that you can cultivate that's going to help you on this journey, it's a sense of humor. Because without that, you're screwed. You have to have a sense of humor about the weirdness of this journey and the shit that gets excavated, because it's so real. And the thing is, and I've said this to everyone on this thread, and I say this to myself, I asked for this growth. I prayed for illumination. I prayed for self-confidence. I prayed for clarity. There's no bypass. It's like, I prayed for illumination. Great. Spirit was like, then we're going to show you all the ways in which you're still completely disconnected from the human race. You want openness? And we're going to show you all the ways in which you embody prejudice, not as a punishment, as an opportunity to really heal. And it's in that healing that we can actually change the world. So I like to try not to do any self-beat around it. I want to normalize the conversation around our humanity, and that includes all this gritty stuff around separation and bias and prejudice, and see it as just one more extension of the spiritual path, no separate than having to look at our childhood trauma. And so, for everyone, it's just like, buckle up. There is no end point until we reach enlightenment. I know for myself, though, because I know how hard this is, how frustrating, how humiliating and humbling, that when I meet someone else who is just fighting with their own demons, my level of compassion that comes up for them as they are is hard-earned based on experience. I wouldn't trade that for anything. And I've often said, you said it in the very beginning, when I'm in my shit, I don't reach out to the people who haven't experienced trauma. My first phone call, I'm gonna reach out to the junkies. I'm gonna reach out to all the different kinds of addicts in my life who have lived to tell the tale, who are not gonna judge me, who are gonna laugh with me and then say, and then what happened, Seane? Oh, that's fucked up. Okay, let's go deeper. Let's look at that. And they're gonna share with me, oh, you think that's bad? Here, look what I just did last week. And if we can hold each other in our shared humanity and normalize all this, I think that we could actually heal this planet. What's happening in our culture right now is trauma is being excavated. We as a society don't have great tools. And so fear is meeting fear, trauma is meeting trauma, and we know the cycle that will perpetuate. And so if we really want to change the world, we have to dismantle the systems. The only way to do that is dismantle the system that's within ourselves that perpetuate that dysfunction. If we get to do that, we are more blessed than most. And if the journey is rough and hard, and it is, so be it. Because what's on the other side of that is truth. And like I said, it's hard-earned truth. And everyone who is on this right now, they have lived to tell the tale. And I hope it was gritty and rough and awkward, because I would love to have a cup of tea with you and hear all the details. Because you're here today, alive, breathing, struggling, with this much more empathy as a result. And that's this much more empathy than most of the world.
Yes.
These are my heroes.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Okay, so Seane, I need to ask you to, I'm just going to say a few things, and I want you to listen up.
Okay, yes, sir.
Okay. Here we go. When you guys support Seane or me or anyone in your life that has a message that you believe in, when you do that, you empower us. The way that you do that is, for example, if you were to buy Seane's book, like if all of us en masse were to buy Seane's book, what you do is you elevate her ability to reach more people. The way that works exactly is if she were to become, for example, a New York Times #1 bestseller, while that's not Seane's reason for being, and that doesn't carry weight for her, except in the fact that it allows her to reach more people and for her message to help more people who would really benefit from the message that she's putting out into the world. That's what we have as a collective, as a community. We have the power to do that. So my wish and my hope is that we support Seane by everybody here. I mean, as long as you have the means and you're called to it. I want to encourage you strongly to go to Revolution of the Soul book, revolutionofthesoulbook.com, and to pre-order this book so that when
Amazon.
Sorry?
Or Amazon.
Or Amazon. Which would be better?
Well, if you go to revolutionofthesoul.com, you get 7 free videos, and you get to download the first chapter. Okay. And you get to pre-order the book. But if you go to Amazon.com, you can just pre-order the book.
Okay. Well, you might as well get all the extra goodies to carry you further on your own journey. But I really want to emphasize this. We are a community that's come together around the idea of holistic healing from addiction. And what we are up against are all of the messages, all of the advertisements, all of the magazines and newspapers and negativity and unbelievable subconscious that's driving our culture. We're up against all of that. Now, when I look out into the world, I see Coca-Cola, I see the military. Not that there's anything wrong with Coca-Cola or the military. I just know that if I had a choice between which consciousness I would want out in the world, I would pick Seane's. And that means that she either has as big a marketing budget as Coca-Cola, which I'm doubting, or we all come together as a community and we support this thing and we get her consciousness out into the world, elevate all of us, and elevate her efforts that she can reach more people. And then all of that is we elevate ourselves and our own community. And we also demonstrate to ourselves the power of our collective. So that's what I wanted to say. Please take an effort today and buy the book. I believe it's going to make a really positive difference for you. I think you're going to enjoy the read, number one. I think it's filled with aha moments, and it really dovetails beautifully with the path of recovery. So check into that. And let's put our hands together and show our love and our gratitude for Seane. And hopefully you'll end up in a Seane Corn workshop one day. Maybe someday Seane Corn and Tommy Rosen would teach a workshop together. Who knows? But that'd be exciting.
Oh my! How fun would that be, Tommy? I would love that.
That'd be fun. It'll be for the freaks only.
It'll
be the name.
Yeah. Tommy, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that support, and everyone who's, unfortunately, I can't see anything because I don't have my glasses on, but I'm seeing a lot of comments come in, and I really do appreciate it. My hope with this book is, like I said, I was really transparent. There's a lot of bypass in the spirituality community because there's a lot of self-image that's dependent upon that bypass. And that's never been my path in yoga or in transformational work. And I wanted to model what it looked like to be messy in this journey, and to still at the same time hold that light. I am as light as I am because of my darkness, not in spite of it. And it's what gave me my sensitivity, and I'm grateful for it. And I would never want it just to, I need to be in relationship with it. And I wrote the book with that intention. But writing the book, like I said, and anyone who, who's dealt with, who lives in their humanity understands this, it terrified me. It made me feel so incredibly vulnerable putting this out into the world. When you say New York Times bestseller list, I got a 760 on my SATs. I showed up drunk from the night before. Like, I don't relate to myself in that way at all. I wrote this because it was part of my own dharma, and I had to tell the truth. And also, hopefully broaden the yoga community and the wellness community to be willing to share stories that are real and relevant today in today's world. And I hope I accomplished that. I don't know. I'd love to hear from everybody when they do read it, or they read that first chapter, which is about me finding God in a gay sex club in New York City in 1980, in the late 80s. So, I mean, it doesn't get grittier than that. So go check it out. But thank you. Thank you.
God bless you, Seane. We love you so much. And thank you again for everything. Thank you for your time tonight and sharing with our community. And everybody, the book is called Revolution of the Soul. And that's what it's all about for all of us. So go on out and get it. And I look forward to seeing you all again here next week. We've got some more special treats coming up. Stay tuned for that. Please bring the palms together at the Heart Center. And let's end with the Recovery 2.0 prayer. Universe, put me in the places you want me to be, with the people you want me to be with, doing the things you want me to do. Thank you for the joys and the challenges of my life. Amen. Sat Nam and namaste to you all. So much love. Big love to you, Seane. We'll see you again soon. And
thank you so
so much love. See you guys soon.
Everyone. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Mwah. Bye.
Bye.